Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something pretty significant, a moment in India's history that's, well, just about to hit a major milestone 50 years. We're talking about this 21-month period, that really left a deep mark. Think about it. June 19, 2025 marks 50 years since the start of what people just call the emergency. And interestingly, the central government is actually planning these nationwide yatras, these sort of journeys, to commemorate it. So I really want to dig into what this period, 1975 to 77, was actually all about. And maybe more importantly, why revisit it now, 50 years on? Why take this history lesson out on the road? This deep dive is, well, it's our attempt to get beyond just the dates and facts, to understand the impact, the lessons that still hold true.
Yeah, absolutely. That period, 75 to 77, it definitely left scars. And you're right, it's so much more than just history to book. It's really about understanding how democracy can be tested, its resilience. These commemorations, they bring up a very real, very human story, how a whole nation wrestled with its own core principles. So let's try and unpack it, make it accessible, cut through any confusion.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. For anyone who needs a refresher, what was this emergency? Can you paint a picture of what it meant for India's democracy to basically hit pause?
Well, a hit pause is a good way to put it, but it was maybe more like a full stop for a while. It was declared June 25th, 1975, then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, lasted until March 21st, 77. And during those 21 months, constitutional safeguards, pretty much gone. Civil liberties just vanished. Freedom of the press, severely restricted. Political opponents, many were arrested just like that, without trial. The Constitution itself, the rule book, suddenly felt more like, well, a suggestion. The government had immense power, and that had real immediate effects on people's lives.
Wow, that sounds intense. So, what led to such a drastic move? What was happening politically? What kind of storm was Indira Gandhi actually facing?
Oh, it was a perfect storm, really.
Uh,
The biggest trigger, you could say, was a court ruling. Allahabad High Court, June 12th, 75. It actually invalidated her 1971 election win,
hmm
said there were electoral malpractices, and it barred her from holding office for 6 years. Now, she did appeal that, but it was a huge blow.
Right, a direct challenge to her legitimacy.
Exactly. And add to that, the country was in a tough spot economically. Inflation was soaring, unemployment was high, lots of public unrest. There were massive protests happening, led by figures like Jayaprakash Narayan JP, calling for a total revolution.
So, facing all that,
Right. Instead of, say, stepping down or just fighting the court case, she went for what many called the nuclear option. She invoked Article 352 of the Constitution, claimed a national emergency because of internal disturbances, and boom. Overnight, India, the world's biggest democracy, became a place where dissent landed you in jail, newspapers were censored, and the government's word was pretty much law. It was a massive shift.
okay, so that's the big picture, the politics. But how did this actually affect ordinary people, beyond the headlines? What did it feel like on the ground?
That's where it gets really stark. It wasn't just abstract politics. It hit home, hard. For example, there were these forced sterilization campaigns, a really grim reality, especially out in rural areas. It was part of this, well, frankly, misguided population control drive, pushed hard by Sanjay Gandhi. Imagine the fear, the coercion, just awful stories that scarred families for, well, decades.
God, that's horrific.
Yeah. And then the press censorship. Newspapers either had to print what the government approved or they did this powerful thing. They just printed blank spaces where editorials should have been.
A silent protest.
Exactly. A really stark visual of silenced expression. And another big one, especially visible in Delhi, was the slum demolitions. Whole neighborhoods bulldozed for beautification, they said.
Yeah.
But people lost their homes, their livelihoods, everything, practically overnight. The disruption, the hardship, it was immense.
It's just, yeah,
Thank
it
you.
really puts into perspective how quickly things can change, how vulnerable basic rights can be. So let's jump back to today. This directive for the Yatras issued June 19th, 2025. Why now? Why is the government deciding to take this history lesson out onto the streets 50 years later? What's the thinking?
Well, the timing, 50 years, it's obviously symbolic. The official reason given is education. They say it's to educate citizens, especially younger people, who maybe don't have a living memory of it, about what happened, about the impact. Frame it as, celebrating the democratic spirit that eventually won out, but also as a cautionary tale, a warning about undermining democratic institutions.
So, kind of like a lest we forget moment, but on a national scale?
Sort of, yeah. Half a century is a long time. A whole generation, maybe two, has grown up without that direct experience. So the offers are framed as a way to bridge that gap. But, beyond just history, the emergency itself is like a case study. It shows how Democratic checks and balances can be dismantled, step by step. If you look at India's current political climate, which is quite lively, let's say, with recent tensions, the ongoing COVID recovery, debates on various policies, telling this particular story now, well, it can serve different purposes. It could be seen as reinforcing national unity, perhaps, or maybe drawing a contrast with the past to, let's say, burnish present credentials. There's definitely a layer of contemporary politics involved. It's complex.
Okay, I see. So, practically speaking, what are these yatras actually going to look like? Across such a diverse country, what can people expect to see?
Yeah, it won't be one size fits all. The government seems to be giving states room to tailor things. So expect a real mix. You'll probably see big public rallies, definitely seminars with speakers, exhibitions with photos and documents from the time, and maybe even street plays, traumatizing events. Imagine a play about the arrests right in a busy market. They can be pretty powerful, pretty visceral.
All right, bringing history to life.
Exactly. And some states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Gujarat, places with strong connections to the anti-emergency movement, they might really go all out. You can see processions, banners saying democracy's Zindabad, speakers talking about local heroes like JP or Morarji Desai.
And what about like the modern touch, social media?
Oh, definitely. In cities, expect a big digital push. Hashtags like hashtag emergency 50, hashtag democracy marches, that kind of thing. Schools and colleges will likely get involved, debates, essays, special assemblies perhaps, and out in the villages, probably more community-focused gatherings. Local leaders sharing stories, maybe over chai and samosas, keeping that oral history alive.
It sounds like each place might put its own spin on it.
For sure. Kerala might highlight its leftist resistance history. Maharashtra could focus on the role of trade unions. And yeah, you'll probably see some political one-upmanship too, with different parties trying to own the narrative of democratic defenders. It'll be interesting to watch.
Definitely. Okay, to really grasp the weight of all this, maybe we should quickly walk through the key moments, just the core timeline of the emergency to lock it in.
Good idea. It helps to see how quickly it all unfolded. So June 12th, 1975, that Allahabad High Court ruling invalidates Indira Gandhi's election. Big shock.
Right, the trigger.
Then, less than 2 weeks later, June 25, 1975, emergency declared. Cites internal disturbances, fundamental rights suspended, opposition leaders arrested overnight.
Just like that.
Just like that. Next day, June 26, 1975. Press censorship starts. Newspapers need government approval. That's when the blank pages started appearing. Then through 1975 and 76, those aggressive policies kick in. The forced sterilizations, the slum demolitions in Delhi and elsewhere. Really dark times.
And then the shift.
Yeah, kind of surprisingly, on January 18th, 1977, Indira Gandhi announces new elections will be held. Maybe she misjudged the public mood. The emergency itself is formally lifted on March 21st, 1977, and then the election results in March 1977, a massive defeat for Congress. The Janata Party, this coalition of opposition groups, wins big. Morarji Desai becomes the first non-Congress PM. It really showed, didn't it? Both how fragile democracy could be, but also, ultimately, how strong the democratic impulse was in India.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to the listener. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, interesting history, but why should I, dealing with my own life in 2025, really care about a political crisis from 50 years ago? What's the relevance today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer, I think, is that the emergency isn't just history. It's a living lesson. It's a powerful reminder that democracy isn't something you just have. It's something that needs constant looking after, constant vigilance. From everyone, it shows how quickly freedoms can be eroded if institutions weaken, if people aren't paying attention. Think about it, freedom of speech, an independent judiciary, fair elections. These things are critical now. The emergency showed what happens when they're compromised.
So it connects directly to the rights we might take for granted.
Exactly. Why can your local paper critique the government today? Why can you vote freely? Part of the answer lies in the lessons learned, sometimes painfully, from periods like the emergency. So these yatras, beyond the history lesson, there may be a chance for communities to come together, share those stories, yes, but also maybe celebrate that resilience you mentioned. Picture it, a small town event, maybe music, people talking, remembering. It's about acknowledging the past, but also reaffirming those democratic values for the future.
That makes sense. Now, you mentioned the term yatra. I can imagine that might cause some confusion for people, associating it mostly with religious pilgrimages. Can we just quickly clarify that?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction to make. Good point. These emergency yatras are not religious pilgrimages at all.
Mhm.
They're borrowing the word yatra, which means journey or procession, for its cultural familiarity, but they are purely public awareness campaigns focused on this historical event, totally separate from things like, say, the famous Jagannath Rath Yatra, the Chariot Festival, which happens around the same time, June 27, 29, 2025, in places like Fremont, California, and Jackson, Mississippi, or the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, the major Hindu pilgrimage, which is actually resuming June 30, 2025 after a 5-year break. Completely different things. These emergency events are political and historical commemorations.
Got it. Clear distinction. Okay, so organizing something like this across India, that sounds like a massive challenge. Logistically, politically, what are the big hurdles and maybe the potential pitfalls?
Oh, huge challenges. Logistically, it's immense. Coordinating rights across states, ensuring safety for potentially large crowds, maintaining some kind of consistent message. It's a nightmare. And remember, we're still mindful of public health. COVID hasn't vanished. As of early June 2025, there were still over 4,000 active cases. So states need to manage that oxygen supplies, isolation facilities, just in case. You'll probably see masks and sanitizer alongside the banners.
Health and safety first, yeah.
Definitely.
Hmm.
But then there's the big one, politicization. The emergency is still a raw nerve for many. There's a real risk these yatras just turn into platforms for political parties to bash each other,
Mm.
scoring points. If that happens, the actual message about learning from history, safeguarding democracy, could just get drowned out by political noise.
That would be a shame.
It would. But on the flip side, there are real opportunities too. Think about engaging communities, especially in rural areas, sparking conversations about history, about civic duty. It could actually foster a stronger sense of civic pride. Maybe even encourage more people to vote in the future. It's a chance to connect people to their nation's story in a very tangible way.
A double-edged sword then. Potential for division, but also for positive engagement.
Mm.
Okay, last thing, let's zoom out. How does India, looking back at the emergency, fit into the bigger global picture right now? Democracy seems to be under pressure in many places.
That's a great question. India doing this kind of public reflection comes at a time when, yeah, democracy globally is facing headwinds. You look at the U.S., grappling with election integrity debates, media polarization. You look at regional tensions, say with Pakistan, questions about governance, stability, democratic norms are everywhere. So these yatras, depending on how they're handled, could send a powerful message. They could position India as a mature democracy, one that can confront difficult parts of its past and reaffirm its commitment to democratic values. A story of resilience.
A potential beacon, even?
Potentially, yes. Or, if they become overly politicized and divisive, they could feed cynicism, both at home and abroad, about using history for political gain. Either way, the world will be watching. How India navigates this public memory exercise says something about its democratic health today. It's definitely a significant moment on the world stage.
So wrapping this up, as India gets ready to mark 50 years since the emergency, these yatras are clearly much more than just parades. They're a real chance for the nation to look back, learn, and acknowledge its democratic path, warts and all.
Couldn't agree more. The emergency was, without doubt, a dark chapter. But it also, maybe paradoxically, proved the underlying strength of India's democracy. Like you said, that stubborn resilience. It survived. And hopefully these events remind everyone listening you to value the freedoms you have, the ones that were, for a time, almost extinguished.
And maybe the thought to leave you with is this. What does that ongoing vigilance we talked about actually mean for you, in your life, in your community? How do we all play a part in keeping those democratic principles alive and well? It's a continuous journey, isn't it? Much like these yatras. Something to think about.